Hi, thanks so much for having me on the show today. I'm going to be talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, introversion. So I have the feeling a lot of you who listen to this podcast are introverts because a lot of people who work from home happen to be introverts, and our dear friend Tara is one. I'm one. Chances are you are too. Even if you're not, I think this episode is going to be really helpful because I'm going to be talking about how introverts work, some misconceptions, and some coping strategies. So even if you aren't one, it might help you better connect with a colleague or a friend, a family member who is an introvert, and help you understand them more. So I think this is going to be a great episode because I didn't know all these things about myself until I realized I was in this introvert box and I have all these classic characteristics, and now I'm like, oh, right, I get it. So I'm excited to share that with you. First, let's start by talking about what an introvert actually is, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions around this point. If you sort of drew up your storybook, classic introvert, it's someone who's super quiet, a bit hermitish, loves reading books, shy, very not confident, demure, that sort of thing. And some of those are spot on, and some of those I think are mischaracterizations of what an introvert really is. So the best definition I found across reading a variety of pieces is that an introvert is someone who craves alone time and, as a flip side, finds groups of people draining, or finds talking to people to be a draining activity. A lot of people, even who know me fairly well, will say like, well, Stacey, you're not an introvert, because I'm fairly chatty. I have absolutely no problem doing a podcast. I have no problem having an animated conversation with my friends. But that's confusing being shy with being an introvert, and those two are actually quite different things. So being shy is actually a type of a social anxiety, and of course it can be along a whole spectrum. And if you don't love talking to people, as introverts probably don't, you're more likely to be shy than an extrovert, but being shy and being an introvert are not the same thing. Another characteristic that gets lumped in with being an introvert is being a highly sensitive person. I also am a highly sensitive person, and these are people who the world just feels louder to them. That's the best way to describe it. Noises seem to be louder to them than it would be to another person. Lights feel brighter. A busy restaurant is like, so my aha moment when I found out I was a highly sensitive person, and remember this is different from introversion, is, so I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she's sweet and adorable, and in very many ways exactly like me, and we were meeting my husband, her father, at dinner, and we had been having a lovely afternoon, and then we go into this restaurant and we sit down, and all of a sudden we are both like cranky pants. Like, she, who usually is the calmest toddler you've ever met, she's like throwing her jacket on the floor, and she's like, "Daddy, you moved my jacket the wrong way," and like she's flipping out, and I'm like, why is she flipping out? And like, I'm flipping out. And then I just like paused for a moment, and I realized it's one of these restaurants that sort of echoes, and the din of the people talking, like the best way to describe it would be like someone was rubbing sandpaper on my nerves. Like, and I was just like, it's the restaurant, it's fraying our nerves. And we ate and then left, and it was like, like, quiet again. So that's a description of what it's like to be a highly sensitive person. And there can be extroverts who are highly sensitive people because it's a biological thing, but it tends to clump along more with introverts. So those are a few like disclaimers, things that go along with it. And what I really want to get back to is the true definition of introvert, which is you crave alone time, and you find working with people or conversing with people at large draining. And that is at the heart of all of these other things that we'll be talking about. So chances are you're one. Introverts tend to be drawn, because they like being alone, to solitary activities and jobs like the ones you and I are doing. We work at home. We, email a couple people, but we don't work in a large office environment most of the time. Maybe some of you do have jobs at an office environment, and if you're an introvert, you probably feel like you come home at the end of the day and you just sort of decompress, and that's completely normal, because whereas other people may find, I don't know, reading a whole book draining, we find having your colleague pop into your cubicle and like talk to you, small talk for a half hour, like your energy level goes straight down. If you're not sure, and there are a lot of people actually who aren't sure, there's a lot of different personality tests out there. One that I just found recently and love is 16personalities.com. It's a standard Myers-Briggs, the INTJ kind of thing. So you would take your test. The first is an I or an E, so that's introvert or extrovert. It'll give you a percentage where you fall along that scale. Like 80% introverted, so pretty strongly. And then it gives you these other characteristics. And they have super cute little drawings of what the different personalities are. And it's called 16 personalities because a 4 by 2 equals 16. So anyway, they have super cute drawings of each of the personality types, and then you read, it's like 9 pages of descriptions about how you tend to deal in relationships and work, and I have like these aha moments like, oh my gosh, that's really insightful. So that's a great test to take, and of course there's tons of others sorting out this introversion extroversion thing, because our society just I think really tends to lump shyness and in a way our society values extroversion a lot. So this is a topic that's talked about a lot in the book Quiet, which is going to be on my list of book recommendations. We value that entrepreneur who's loud, who's like always says something really confident, and like that's how those are the people that get ahead. That's how, most of our politicians are, and the people who are, heads of companies, they're like really loud, or at least that's our stereotype. And so it can be hard to know whether you're really an introvert or not because of the different societal weights. Maybe you were told as a kid, like, oh, you're being too quiet, like speak up, stand up for yourself. So taking a test is a good thing to do. Let's talk about some like really interesting other little things that I didn't actually know were part of introversion until I started reading a lot about it. So like I said, the main characteristic is that you you crave alone time, and that tends to play out that you do your best work alone. And people at large are draining. So what's really interesting is for most introverts, it's strangers and large groups of people that are draining. It's not your best friend. And I'm going to talk about this when I get to the strengths. You actually tend to do quite well in one-on-one deep conversations. So my absolute, the third circle of hell scenario in life is you're talking with a friend and they want to go out to lunch, and you're like, okay, sounds great. And you want to talk about this great new book you read, and you're all ready for this deep, wonderful conversation. And then they're like, and Kiki should come along, and Bob, and oh my gosh, he's bringing Angie. And you're like, great, okay. That's the worst thing that could happen to me. And it's that kind of small talk that's very draining. You, as an introvert, tend to think best on your own. So these brainstorming team meetings where everyone's supposed to pitch their ideas out tend to be really draining because you just want to sit down, do your thinking, and come back in a half hour when you've sort of gotten your thoughts together, because you need a little bit of quiet to do that thinking. A lot of introverts tend to have what's called a strong internal monologue. I didn't know this was a difference about people. As a person with a strong internal monologue, I basically talk to myself all day long, and I'm just playing through various scenarios and like, ooh, what if that happened? And not in like an anxiety-driven sort of way, just like, oh, well, I could do this, or, you know, my head goes like this all the time. And then one day I have an extrovert friend who said to me that she had heard that some people have things called internal monologues. And I was like, what? You don't have one of those? Because, and I can say this because I have spent time with her, which is draining, everything that runs through her mind comes out loud, and it's an open point of conversation. So apparently she doesn't have a lot of thoughts just like in her own head. Whoa, I know, blew my mind too. Introverts also, partially because it's internal monologue, process information very deeply and take on a lot of information. So introverts are typically the ones who notice that, like, oh, that person's like looking really uncomfortable in the middle of this conversation, or boy, so-and-so didn't say that this thing went really well. I wonder what's up with that. And you're taking that information in and you're processing it, and like, you're just processing more, apparently, than most other people do. And as a result, and this happens to me all the time, you tend to be really slow in actual conversation. So it happens to me so often, it's embarrassing, that someone, you know, I'll be talking about a project or a whatever with a client, and they'll say something, and I kind of have like a coping mechanism being like, okay, yeah, sure, like, and then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, why did I say, yeah, sure, that's a terrible idea, like, but I hadn't done all of my thinking through it yet, because extroverts think as they talk, so they're kind of talking their way through it. Introverts, we're doing our thinking, and then like we have to catch up. So those are like just some description words. I want to talk about some strengths, and some of these are really, really, really amazing strengths, and then I'm going to talk about things that may be perceived as weaknesses, and how we can cope with them. So strengths are, introverts tend to have a really great, I'm using the word imagination loosely. I don't necessarily mean imagination in the like fairies and elves sort of way, but a really great way of thinking through future scenarios or alternate realities. So if you have a client and you're consulting about some particular thing, you, if given some alone time, really can come up with some great ideas kind of out of the box because you have a strong internal monologue. And you process lots of information very deeply. You may make some connections that other people don't make. And that's a serious strength, especially in the kind of intellectual property. I don't mean intellectual property like copyrights, but like in the intellectual realm. Here's the slow thinking part. What's that word? You know, information dealing, which is what most of us do. So if you're selling your products online, part of your job is selling information, right? You're telling people how to use your yarn. You're telling people how to use this new body balm you made. Maybe you make digital ebooks. All of these things are dealing in information. So having the ability to think and make new connections is a really amazing asset. Like I said before, you notice really subtle cues, you're taking lots of information in, and a lot of times you don't know that you've noticed something unique until you really like hear what a lot of other people are saying. So you may have noticed that absolutely everyone, like every store, has a gold top, you know, in the windows, and it didn't occur to you that no one else noticed this. But you're just picking up all of this information and noticing really subtle cues. Also body language and shifts in mood. So a classic introvert experience is that you might go to a party with a partner, and you'll walk away and be like, oh my gosh, what was up with Jeff? Like, something really seemed off with him. or he said a snide comment to Maria or whatever, and your partner's like, I didn't notice that, like, you're just making stuff up. And you're not making stuff up, you're just noticing really small things that other people don't notice. You're incredibly thorough. Introverts are very thorough. So because of this ability to think very deeply, to follow a line of reasoning all the way through, it doesn't necessarily mean you're detail-oriented, but you're digging in very deeply and really completing tasks in a deep way. Introverts tend to be very independent, so you don't need a group of people. You don't need people to like check your boxes for you. You can take your work and you can do it. Also in life, you know, I know this is true of Tara. It's true of me too. Like on a vacation or whatever, just need some alone time. I'm just going to be independent. I'm just going to sit somewhere and read a book, okay? So I think independence is a really great strength. Maybe some other people don't, but I think it's a really great gift to be able to just chill out on your own and do something. A strength that I think gets missed a lot, especially in this current age we're in. I love social media. My job is consulting with people on managing their brand in social media. But it's gotten us to a place where like a one sentence kind of ping back and forth is like the level of conversation we're used to having. Introverts really excel at deep conversation. So like my perfect, you know, lunch would be talking to one person, one-on-one, like getting super deep into an issue. You may relate to this experience. You may have friends, I hope you do, I have a few, where you see them and it's like, you know, how are you or whatever, and then like I'm known amongst my friends for just like hitting it super hard, like next question. And it's like, so were you you know, with your job, were you thinking about like, you know, moving on next year? Like, I can't think of an example, but like I hit the question super deep and super hard because with friends I'm really friends with, like, I feel like I want to see into your soul, and that's how I know you. I read something on the 16 Personalities site that said, like, you know, your worst social circle is just being in a group of friends, and small talk and gossip just circles around. Like, for an introvert, that can't count as like meaningful interaction. So of real strength, I think, is having these deep, like, meaningful conversations. Other people may see it as a weakness, actually, because you're not happy to sit and talk about the weather for like a really long time, or hair, or unless it's a deep conversation about hair. Tara and I have had deep conversations about hair, but they're deep, not surfacey, totally different. Okay, so those are some real strengths, and part of, in any realm, being comfortable with yourself and really accepting yourself is to realize these strengths and sort of own them. And it can be hard, you know, we're all trying to gain more confidence in life, I think, and it can be hard to sort of say like, wow, I'm amazing because I can have like a deep conversation and like bear out someone's soul, and like that rocks. So I do want you to sort of think about those things and embrace them, because they're really good character traits. And you may not have all of them. Obviously everyone falls on a continuum being an introvert, so maybe some things are stronger for you than others. So identifying what you see as your real strengths and harnessing them is important. Now I want to go to the other side. I want to talk about scenarios that are draining, and these are things that are connected to what you might call weaknesses, and how to harness them into strengths, or at least have coping strategies. So in life, there are all things we're not very good at. There are some things that introverts really aren't good at, but there's ways to shift them. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples, and I hope that by me doing this, you could sort of catch on and come up with your own examples of draining scenarios for you, and maybe how to turn them around. So one thing that a lot of, I think everyone finds hard, but is particularly hard for introverts, is the idea of sales. So like the classic networking, doing sales, just, you know, it feels like small talk a lot of the time. And most of us who run independent businesses in some form have to do some sales, right? And even if you're selling your product on Etsy, you need to have a sales page describing why someone should buy your product. A strength that's actually really closely related to this is your deep ability to have one-on-one conversations. So networking tends to mean walking around like, hey, I don't know what people do in networking. I don't know. They don't really snap their fingers. But a way for an introvert to be amazing at networking is you find one person and you start to have one-on-one conversations. So it's not that you're working a whole room. You're identifying a person and having a deep conversation with them about it. So for example, you're explaining benefits and explaining what you do. And you're having this deep one-on-one conversation, and that tends to not be very draining, and you're actually better at it than a lot of other people. So I work with a yarn company, and I go to trade shows, and obviously we sell yarn at trade shows. So if a customer comes up, and this could be a digital customer or an in-person customer, if that customer comes up, I have absolutely no trouble saying, can I tell you about our yarn? I'm not trying to sell you the yarn. I am telling you what I have, and it's up to you to decide if you want it or not. I know Tara takes a very similar philosophy with her products. She's telling you what she has. It's not a fit for everyone on the planet. Products that are a fit for everyone on the planet tend to not be very interesting. And so she's telling you what she has, and you can decide whether you want it or not. Your job, the best way you can be a salesperson, is to faithfully communicate the strengths and even the weaknesses of this product that you're offering. And introverts are actually really, really good at that. Similarly, in networking, if your goal is to find, let's say, a partner to do this project with, you can have a one-on-one conversation with a person about what you're looking for in a partner, and those can be incredibly fulfilling conversations, which is not this bouncing ball around in a classic networking sense. I mentioned that introverts tend to not be fast on their feet, quick talkers. I always feel like in a meeting situation or in a conversation situation, I'm just like, things are happening, and 5 minutes later I'm like, oh, I had the best idea. So I've just learned I work best in writing. So after a meeting's finished, after whatever, I typically send an email that would say like, hey, thanks for meeting with me today. I was just thinking a little bit afterwards, and here's a summary, here's some extra things I thought of. Because I work best in writing. You can't I try to get away with not having phone call meetings or whatever. You can't always do that. So acknowledging that you work best in writing, everyone appreciates a follow-up afterward, and you can add your thoughts in writing to that. So that's a great coping strategy for people who feel like they have a lot of one-on-one meetings where their brain just isn't as fast. Or another thing is you could ask for an outline in advance so you can kind of process your thoughts. Like for this podcast episode, I wrote out my talking points in advance because I knew if I just sat and was like talking, I wouldn't think of all of the examples I wanted to think of on the spot. So turning a weakness of not thinking fast in conversation into a strength, which is I'm really good at consolidating my thoughts afterward, and I'm going to be the person who sends a really great follow-up email with all of my thoughts in writing, is now an asset because a lot of people aren't going to take the time to do that. So a coping strategy for the weakness of people drain you is to set up your calendar, and only certain things are allowed during a certain time. So for example, if people drain you and you have to do a phone call or you have to do a meeting or whatever, set it for a limited amount of time. So each day you have an hour where this is your phone call time, or you have a whatever, and stick to it. I feel like as business owners, our job is to accomplish you can define it by revenue, you can define it by sales numbers, however you want to define it, but our job is to do a certain thing. Our job isn't to say yes to everything that comes our way, right? So if someone asks for a phone meeting, you say, look at your calendar. Oh, next Tuesday is the next appointment I have open. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. So limiting the amount of time you do in training tasks so you can spend the amount of time you need doing amazing tasks that are true to your business and your life is another important one. I'm reading a book now called Essentialism, which I'll also write in the book recommendations, about picking things that really matter and doing them. This is so true for introverts as well. Pick the thing you want to do and really do it, and limit the time that you're doing things that are really draining. One thing I find helpful for me, a strategy, and I'm still working on it in my life, is catchphrases sort of for things you're not great at. So I'm really working on that's a really great question, let me get back to you. Because at least my impression is in American society is we're trained to prioritize having an answer right then, right? If you have an answer in class, you're the first person. And the first answer isn't always the best answer, and especially for introverts. So being at peace with that's a great question. You know what? I'm writing it down. Let me get back to you is a really important coping strategy. And again, it's not even, I hesitate to even say a weakness. It's not even a weakness. It's doing a thorough job. But it's something you sort of have to train yourself to do because we've been taught to be fast and to say something right then. One more thing that's sort of a know thyself sort of thing is different things are draining for different people, even amongst introverts. So it's super interesting. My husband's also an introvert. You may or may not be paired up with an introvert. Sometimes introverts and extroverts pair together, opposites attract, and it works out amazing because one person pulls someone out in a social world and the other draws in. We both happen to be introverts, but super different kinds of introverts. So I could care less how many people are around me as long as they're not making very much noise and I don't have to talk to you. So I would be perfectly fine, let's say in a co-working environment where I'm sitting next to a bunch of people doing their own thing, and as long as they know they shouldn't talk to me. It doesn't take any of my energy. These are the same kind of people who work in a coffee shop, right? Because the person's not going to talk to you, you sit around doing your own thing. What drains me is having to have a decision conversation. Like, you want to go get coffee now? What kind of coffee do you want? Like, that is like, drains me. My husband is actually very different. He feels that the presence of another human is draining. So for example, if we're in the living room, and actually we just discovered this fairly recently, and we're sitting on the sofa and I'm reading a book and he's watching baseball, he still feels like he's not getting his alone time because I could say something at any moment, and that's draining for him. So you have to sort out for yourself what your own kind of introversion is, I guess, and how your coping strategies will work out, right? So for my husband, it now means saying, I need legit alone time. I'm going out to the patio, and shutting the door. And that's important to know because you're in charge of your interactions with the world and you need to regulate those. So I've talked a lot about learning more. I want to give you some book recommendations because these are the books that really clarified for me some things about introversion, kind of helped my own self-discovery. The first one is called Quiet. This is a book, I think it was one of the first big introvert books. You may have already read it. She talks a lot about introverts in the world. Not so much personal coping strategies, but about how American society really idolizes or promotes introverts. Promotes extroverts. And classically introverts, even in top level schools or businesses, hadn't done terribly well because the perception was if you weren't jumping out with the first thought, blah, 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 you weren't eager enough and you weren't dedicated enough to do a good job, and how that reasoning is completely false. So then two more books that I want to recommend have to do more with this personal self-development aspect. This is where I read a lot of things about, oh my gosh, that's what an introvert is, and that's me, and how to cope with it, are Hiding in the Bathroom, which is titled because the author would hide in the bathroom fairly often during conferences, and The Secret Lives of Introverts. So those are two really great books to read to learn more about introversion and kind of go more on this self-discovery path. And then my last book recommendation is related to introversion, but not really. So this is, it's called The Highly Sensitive Person. And this, as I said before, is noises are too loud, lights are too bright, you take on emotions from others like they're glue onto you. And it's not the same as introversion, but if those characteristics sound like you, they do highly co-occur with introversion. So The Highly Sensitive Person might be a book that you're really interested in reading. So thank you so much for allowing me to be on the podcast today and listening to what I have to say. I really believe that introversion is a strength, and if you're sharing in those personality characteristics, I encourage you to think about it perhaps in a new way from what you've been told by others, and really use those strengths as a way to catapult your business to a stronger place, because some of these characteristics, like having deep conversations and thinking really thoroughly and deeply, are amazing characteristics that are fantastic for business owners to have. So go out there, you introverts, you. I'll see you another time.